Just because you bought a company, don't underestimate that you're better. For entrepreneurs and people building their companies for the point of sale, be prepared because you are representing what you've built. If you sell, if you play a role in the next company, that's great, but you still may not like it. You're used to running it.
As you build a company, and one of the exits, of course, is M&A.
Sure.
And of course, it can be difficult to say, well, I'm not going to take this $10 million payday because I don't see it as a culture fit for my business, and I'm going to wait until I get a better one. Right? It's difficult.
It's tough to say no when you have that check. So I would say you have to be a problem solver. You have to use data and analytics. You cannot jump to the solution, and you better have the patience to sit down and say, Chris, really, what's the problem? Let's keep peeling it back.
Welcome to Forging the Future, and I'm here with Tamara Shaw, Chief Transformation Officer at C1. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what is a Chief Transformation Officer?
Well, it's a good question. It's a little bit of a combination of, I would say, it's a bridge between a Chief Operations Officer, a COO, and a CIO. It's an up-and-coming new position, part of the C-suite that's really come along over the last 5, 6, 7 years. I think because companies have seen they don't have the focus or the dedication in any of the other C-suites to really drive that transformation of an organization.
So you're trying to look ahead to the future and try to figure out how we need to transform to get there before someone else beats us to the punch?
A little bit of digital transformation for sure. It's looking at that strategy. Where do we need to be in the next 12 months, 24 months, we don't really go beyond 24 months anymore with technology, right? But also operational transformation. And it's really been a fun experience at C1 over the last 3 years since we've set it up officially.
And that you need operational efficiency, operational transformation internally, right?
Exactly. We really started about 5, 6 years ago. The dreaded consultants came into the organization, as we're all very familiar with. And consulting companies come in, show you what you need to do. My executive team and I looked at that and said, well, we know how to do this, right? But it was good. It was a good learning experience. And so we had always been driving operational maturity and productivity, efficiencies. And then we really formalized it with the governance and execution arm with me as the lead.
When you're hiring a person, you're typically hiring for culture, right? You're vetting that person to see whether they will fit into the type of culture you have, and you're very transparent in your values and your mission and size of business and who you are. But when you're acquiring a company, you often don't have those choices, and you're not interviewing the company for a culture fit.
No, you're not.
So how do you handle integrating the culture once you're doing that?
It's a struggle. It's a struggle because of some of the companies being smaller. They're used to a culture. And how do you even define culture, Chris? Right? I would go into the companies and they're like, well, you're ruining my culture. Like, well, what's your culture? Well, I get to take off at 4 on Fridays. I said, that's not a culture. So I think it's difficult to define what you define as culture. And I think every team member or every employee defines culture differently. I think
if they don't have it
posted on the board or on the wall.
They don't have their 5 values and they don't have the mission, vision statement and things like this.
Exactly. But, if they had
which a lot of small companies don't.
They don't. But, they had the culture, they had the family feel. It's very difficult to keep that family feel. You're one or two sisters and now you're jumping into, way larger family. And it's really difficult. So we try on that culture to feed them in slowly, right? Convince them why this is a good thing. In some situations, right, you didn't have a choice. You didn't have money left. You should be lucky.
Someone acquired you.
That somebody acquired you, but the employees don't know that.
Right.
And you don't want to tell the employees that because you want to be respectful to the owners and so forth. So it's really tough. So for entrepreneurs and people building their companies for the point of sale, I think it's beautiful, right? Capitalism at its finest, right? But be prepared, because you are representing what you've built. And then when you do sell, or if you sell, if you play a role in the next company, that's great. But you still may not like it because you're used to running it. And
I think that's an important point. Like, we have a lot of startup founders in our audience as well. And as you build a company, and one of the exits, of course, is M&A.
Sure.
And sometimes you're forced, like, you have to. This is your safety raft. Sometimes, though, you might have some choices in who you're selling to.
Sure.
And of course, it can be difficult to say, well, I'm not going to take this $10 million payday because I don't see it as a culture fit for my business, and I'm going to wait until I get a better one. Right? It's difficult. I'm not sure how many people make that decision. Probably fairly rare.
It's tough to say no when you have that check, and you're right. It's like, come on, Chris, I want your company.
You've been on a 10-year journey. You're tired. You put all this money and effort and time into it, and then I mean, they don't come along every day, that opportunity. So you really have to think a little bit ahead about, like, what does that exit kind of look like? Were there any operational improvements that had an impact, during, your leadership as you went through this whole process? Any lessons learned there? Yeah,
maybe the acquisition piece is just a whole, I would say that first phase. And then as we started going into that optimization and productivity focuses, I would say big lesson learned is we don't use technology because technology costs money. And you never want to make the investment in technology because it costs money. Eventually, you have to make that investment in the technology if you're going to optimize, and if you're going to drive productivity, and if you're going to grow at scale without constantly growing that cost basis. And so that was a big piece that we had to learn. Right? We knew it. It's just we didn't have time to stop and say, okay, we now need to focus on the insides of the operations and really get that technology in place. So that was a big piece.
Was there pushback internally on that? I mean, how much of that did you have to drive?
Pushback internally because we're PE backed, right? We had gone through 3 turns, and went private, went public, went back private, and so a lot of change there. And PE firms only want to invest what they need to. Right. So it's an interesting ride. But we had a great IT organization and great entrepreneurial thinking from talents that came from acquisitions. So it was really nice to tap into that and say, oh, they know how to do this. Let's take advantage of that. So that was some of the big lessons learned is don't underestimate, just because you bought a company, don't underestimate that you're better. Okay. You need to keep your eyes open and your ears open and your critical thinking to really absorb why you brought that company and what those talents bring to the table.
So you mean that they had some lessons or contributions to the larger business of how to do things better, faster, more efficiently, et cetera. Not just like, well, we're the big gorilla, you got to do it our ways. Is that a mindset that you had to foster? Or what?
It was a mindset assumed. And running through the acquisitions and the integrations, you can't have, the tail wagging the dog. I can't change the process for 1,500 people because we bought yours and yours is a better process, but you're only 50. So, that is really difficult. And then you have the best meaning and the best intentions to say, okay, you're coming over, we're going to align, but that's a great idea. Let's add it to the list so that when we have a breath, we can come back and look at how you did that better. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, because you are more flexible and nimble and, can move quicker when you're a smaller organization where you can't take those risks as a larger company. You can't be that exposed. So you do have to have those controls, and controls add time and controls that non-value add. And well, I shouldn't say non-value add, but there's value to them, but people don't always understand it.
I know how important staying informed is for innovation and growth. The Forging the Future newsletter brings you the best in tech trends, startup advice, and industry insights. Join our community and forge your future with us. Subscribe now.
Yeah, I think that people don't understand, well, probably a lot of things, but you're right. What works for a 50-person company doesn't work for a 1,500-person company.
Right.
There's also that is a better process, but there is risks in implementing it. We're not really sure it will be better for the larger company or not. Maybe it's an incrementally better, or here's a process we know it works and we're not going to take this risk in this new, whiz bang thing. Mm-hmm. But then sometimes you do. How do you know?
You don't. We went through, the gap analysis and the operational due diligence, and we sunset several applications that were better than what we had. But again, how do you stop? When we were doing that, when we were moving that quickly, we didn't have we just didn't have the opportunity to stop and say, your application is better for, I don't know, pro services or something, right? Or, we did look at the networking and the monitoring and some of that. A lot of that came from our acquisitions. It's like, oh, they have a much better, stronger, deeper, wider. And so that we would assimilate into our environment. But those business applications that are to the end users and to your customers, it was just too difficult. We didn't have time to stop. And so now, we're looking at we just implemented a whole new enterprise financial new ERP system. And now we're looking at implementing a whole new CRM system. And so therefore we're starting with a clean slate.
Those are big tasks.
They are.
Every time you decide to do an ERP or change ERPs.
Yes.
It's a lot of time, money, and effort to do that. And this is also why they're so sticky.
Yes.
Because they have to be a lot better for you to change.
For sure.
It can't be 10% or 20% better. It's got to be really, really better. And also, a lot of times when it is better, it's more expensive. And now it's times 1,500, not times 50, right? So.
And talk about culture, right? The people you have on those teams designing your new ERP or your new CRM, they have got to be open to new ways of working, and they have to be open to changing the future. We can't keep doing things like we did in the past just because we did it that way.
How do you staff those teams? How do you find people that are open?
It's very difficult. For our ERP implementation, we selected SMEs from within the business, and then we brought in contractors, right?
Subject matter experts.
Yeah, subject matter experts, and said, your job is to keep us honest. Your job is to tell us we need to change because we don't have the best practice. And we'll be doing something similar, I'm sure, with our CRM implementation.
Interesting.
Which you can imagine is as exciting because you have all the sales reps like, hey, you know what we want? And they're like, yeah, the most expensive one.
So tell us a little bit about launching the Global Innovation Center.
Sure. So we've always had a presence over in India from our technology side, our developers, our network monitoring, and so forth. When we launched the transformation office 24 months ago, our board approached us and said, you have a significant number of subcontractors over there. Why aren't you establishing a footprint? And it was a good question. It's one of those areas you just grow and you don't realize how many subcontractors you have over there until you stop and look. And it's like, we do have a significant presence. So we did the analysis. We worked with a consulting firm that stood hip to hip with us and looked at the business case. We looked at Hyderabad, which is where our footprint is today. And then we looked at, Bangalore and other locations in India. And the business case made sense for us to establish that footprint. So we set it up and
by footprint, you mean a company?
Company and a physical location.
Okay.
No more subcontractors. They're C1 employees. We hired a country manager, really great country manager, and he had wonderful contacts. So he brought in some really good, strong leaders as well. And our first group that we shifted over there to be C1 employees were in our shared services account back office. And then we continued to build out our technology team. And then we did a big build, operate, transfer. And so now we went from 0 to 500 employees in 18 months.
Wow.
It was a very humbling experience for me. I've had the opportunity to be there twice in the last year. And amazing getting to learn the culture. Very challenging as well. I think people think, oh, just offshore it. They can do it. And if you don't have that operational maturity in your organization, it gets very difficult. You can't shift something that doesn't have consistency, documentation. And then when you do shift it and you don't have that, your local management is frustrated because they're like, well, they don't know how to do it. Well, did you teach them? Did you train them? What does that documentation look like? So it's not for the faint of heart by any means. But we have a great leadership team over there, and our operational maturity and our leaders here in the U.S. are starting to evolve and adapt as well, to understand the culture. And we're really making a point to understand the cultures, because if you don't understand the culture, I don't know that you can get that unity from a team.
Well, I think that's why there are so many horror stories about companies using, whether it's Eastern Europe or Indian resources, et cetera. It's not necessarily because those resources are bad. It's because you didn't understand how to project manage them. And you don't understand how to project manage them because you don't understand the culture. You don't understand whether yes means no and no means yes.
Right.
Or if, when they say yes, they mean they understand, not that they're going to do. Whether they have the U.S., can-do attitude, build the plane in the air, or whether they, are risk averse.
Right.
And you can have the American tolerance of risk, and the other country tolerance of risk can be wildly different, and they're just not comfortable with saying we can do it, for example, right?
Right.
And so, you just can't hire a team and drive them without understanding. Did you, with the you had a lot of subcontractors, which meant you had other subcontractor partners. Did you use one of those to do your what's called a BOT, build, operate, transfer? And so you were able. Did you retain some number of those original employees instead of just wholeheartedly replacing them?
We retained. So we worked with 5 or 6 different third-party companies over there, but we had a substantial presence with one. And luckily, the owners there were U.S. owners that had grown in India with our help. Right. With our help, and they were ready to get out of the business. So the build, operate, transfer the BOT came at a really good time.
It was a win-win.
It was a win-win.
Almost like another M&A.
It was, exactly. And I was very nervous because I'm like, okay, we need to do blah, 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 blah. And they're like, no, right? This is friendly. And, it's all written, and it was all worked very, very well. You still have to go through the capability analysis and the skill set, because you gave your business to a company that managed 250 of your employees that weren't your employees. So you put a lot of trust into that organization to make sure that the skill sets are correct and that the productivity is there. And so when they do become your employees, and the covers are pulled back a little bit, but it was a good experience. But there's a challenge, right, Chris? I mean, you and I, right, or anybody else watching the podcast, right, they pick up the phone and it's like, I don't want to be talking to anybody, with an accent that I don't understand, or I can't, isn't a clear enough accent. But we really spend a lot of time on language. We have a significant public sector component of our business, so we're very cognizant of that separation of that wall. And then we still have work to do. People are afraid. You don't understand that people don't travel. right?
Still, you mean?
Still.
Right now? You mean after COVID?
Well, and they're not used to it. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, let's go to India. And they're like, what? Go where? Why? I'm like, well, you have 30 people over there. Maybe you should meet them.
Yeah.
But they don't
Think about it.
And it's not Cancun, just zipping down and zipping back.
But no, it's a good point, because just like remote work, and we have offices all over the world. We're in Munich and Lithuania and Poland and Guadalajara and other places. And you do need to go and visit and talk and meet and learn. And it is different. It doesn't mean that you need to do it every week or anything, but it's like, hey, yeah, you do have a team, go meet them.
Right.
You can only, it is different than a Zoom call.
It is.
And being able to go and have lunch or go to dinner or do those team building events and things is super important to integrating with the company.
It is.
And more managers should understand that. I think also, like you pointed out, the key is empathizing with the culture. Part of that is going there. Part of that is learning some of the language, and developing that ear for, understanding them. Maybe then also having English classes within the company, say, look, we need to raise your level of English from, I always get it backwards, C1 to B1, whatever, which way it goes. But because we want to, help you, and also it's good for our clients and customers. But, there's a big empathy piece of it, right?
It's a big empathy piece, and I would catch myself getting defensive because that's my baby. And the people there, they're catchers. You tell me what you want me to do. They have a huge heart to serve and to do it correctly. At least the team members that I've engaged with on our team.
Well, any final recommendations for someone that's maybe, an aspiring leader in transformation?
I would say an aspiring chief transformation officer has to have grit, has to be collaborative. I've never had a team, Chris. Everything I accomplished, I never had a team. I had a team of one, Lynn and I, and everything else was done by influence. And across
and magnets,
pretty much, and cross matrix, and building those relationships where I would say, hey, Chris, we have this. You would be great at working on this. And I was very blessed with that over the last 10 years. But the transformation component is so big, is so important. And COOs do a wonderful job, and CIOs do a wonderful job. But there is that gap of who's representing the business and who's representing the enterprise, that when this is going on, we know what's going on over here. And I think that's why companies are going more and more and investing in chief transformation officers, or at least a similar function somewhere in the organization to manage those strategic initiatives. So I would say you have to be a problem solver. You have to use data and analytics. You cannot jump to the solution. And you better have the patience to sit down and say, Chris, really, what's the problem? Let's keep peeling it back. And if you don't have that kind of thought process, it's probably not the right spot for you.
Very interesting.
But it's very fun. You have to have, it's very changing. You have to have an appetite for change. So,
well, it sounds interesting. Innovation, change, flexibility. Yeah, if that's you, then that's maybe this position is something you could be interested in, right?
Right. For sure.
Well, I learned a lot. I did not know about this position before. Sounds like something very needed. I do have some socks for you.
Wonderful.
It speaks the binary language.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Thank you. I will wear them proudly.
Thank you. Well, it was great to have you on the show, Tamara.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your time.
At Softtech, we don't just follow the trends, we set them. As the founder and CEO, I've built a team that excels in delivering cutting-edge solutions in software, hardware, and IoT. From concept to completion, we're the partner that turns your tech dreams into reality. Softtech,
where innovation starts.